Welcome to Fitness Casual. Real results come from more clarity, not more effort. Today, we know you've tried cutting calories, doing endless cardio. Maybe you've thought about other options like fat burners or medication, but the belly fat is still there, right? It's still there. It feels like nothing works. And so today, Kat and I are going to break down science-backed strategies that actually reduce belly fat and improve your long-term health, because that's really also what we want to do here. And these are the same methods that research shows works better than crash diets. It's not just for looking leaner. It lowers your risk of diabetes, heart disease, inflammation, and it's the same protocols that we use in our program every single day with our clients. So we're going to break it down so you know exactly what to do with your nutrition, with your workouts, and with your lifestyle starting today. So I'm Andrew Hayes, and with me is the not a fan of the dad bod, Kat Bass.
Hi, everyone.
I don't know if that's true. I should have asked you, I guess.
Yeah,
but
that's
you
not
probably,
true.
I guess,
true.
like,
I
you know,
have no
you don't
issue with a dad
judge.
bod.
But from a
No.
health perspective, you want to make sure everyone feels good, right?
Yeah.
But we don't judge ever. Being a dad is hard.
Yeah, I get it.
Kat, let's do our hot start as usual. We're talking about NEAT a little bit today as one of a great thing you can do for your belly fat that's really achievable. NEAT, non-exercise activity, still a good way to burn calories and be healthy. You have a favorite NEAT activity or?
So my answer is very boring because I live in an apartment. But my answer is walking because I do so much walking. But if I had a home, I'm sure it would be like gardening or some cool like hobby I did in my backyard. I don't have access to that. I can't do too much NEAT in my apartment itself aside from like cleaning, which I don't mind. I think that's fun too. But yeah, a lot of walking, literally anywhere I need to go, any store I have to walk to, my dog, I have to walk him to hang out with him. I also will city bike around if I need to get somewhere farther. So that's neat because it's not really like exercise, but I do, a lot of steps for me.
That's awesome. You know, New York is such an interesting case study because on the surface, it's high stress.
Yeah.
It's small apartments. It's not a lot of, I mean,
Pollution.
there's pollution. There's a decent amount of outdoor space, you know, like Central Park and West Side Highway. But like generally speaking, compared to suburbs or middle of nowhere in America, it's pretty condensed. And you have restaurants and alcohol and no cars, all of this stuff. But so many people are just moving all day. And it really is something to be said for that, which we covered a little bit in our episode last year about Europeans and why they don't have obesity nearly as high as Americans, because they just live that kind of natural city life of not sitting in a car, not sitting on the couch, just kind of getting out and doing stuff. Because I remember I lived in New York too, and you get claustrophobic almost in your 800 square foot apartment. You're like, I don't want to be here anymore. Whereas if you're in the suburbs and you got a lot of comforts, it's really easy to just kind of melt into the couch or drive from point A to point B. So I think it's a good answer, as much as it's maybe not the most original answer of all time.
Well, I think one thing that's also different is in New York, when you're walking, you could walk anywhere. Different neighborhoods, different path. If I had a house in the suburbs, all you can walk is what is around you. There's no like other walk to go on. So that also helps is like walking to a completely different area, seeing something different, just taking a different street than you normally do. Like that does change it up a lot. And I think if I walked as much as I do now on the same street, seeing the same stuff over and over, I probably would not enjoy it nearly as much.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, my answer is similar. I love taking my dog out. One, just because I don't have a choice, and he's a very active breed, and so he's like, we're going outside. I know that it's raining or it's 10 degrees in Colorado today, but we're going. But it's also fun to just kind of be in nature, and we've talked about this a little bit on other episodes, but dogs are just good reminders of like how much creatures love being outside, right? They're sniffing and they're looking around, and he's just very stimulated. And so I try to do the same thing. I try to put my phone away. Sometimes I'll listen to a podcast or call a friend, but sometimes I also just like to be outside because I think there's value. I know there's value in that. We've seen the studies of just being in nature. And so I think that's another one where you're kind of checking off multiple boxes at once of you're moving, but you're also outside, you're also enjoying nature, mental health breaks, sun exposure, vitamin D, all of that kind of stuff. And so that's why there's so many studies about people having healthier lives when they have a dog, which is great. We both have dogs, Kat.
Yep. No, it's the best. The best.
So NEAT is one of the things we're going to cover today, but we're going to cover a lot. And we're talking particularly about belly fat today. And this is an important distinction. we know that it is just aesthetically something people really focus on, right? It's common in the dad bod, as I kind of made light of earlier. It's also common in women, something they want to lose. But it's also an important distinction in terms of long-term health. And losing weight in general can be healthy for you if done the right way. But losing fat, especially belly fat, and we're going to go into exactly what that means, has a host of different benefits for you. Stress, muscle, hormones, sleep, nutrition quality, all the things that go into it. And so this is a really important thing to understand, not just to like look better in the beach if that's your goal, but to also be optimally healthy and feel better. So Kat, where do you want to start?
So yeah, there's a lot to dive into with belly fat. First we want to explain the different types of belly fat because they're not all created equal, and you have to understand that one is way more dangerous than the other. So I want to specify the difference between these two. So first we have subcutaneous fat. This is the fat that's right under your skin. This is the fat that you can pinch. It's mostly cosmetic, like people don't like how it looks to have this fat, but it's not necessarily the most dangerous thing. Yes, it can lead to obesity and poor health, but having subcutaneous fat to a certain degree is normal, healthy. It's just when there's too much, you can borderline, being overweight, which leads to other health issues, but it's not really the type of fat that is the main issue there. On the other hand, we have visceral fat. So this is the fat that you cannot pinch. It's surrounding your organs like your liver, your pancreas, your intestines. And this is one of the most dangerous types of fat because it drives insulin resistance, it raises inflammation, it increases your risk of heart disease, diabetes, even certain types of cancer. This type of fat is also hormonally active, so it's releasing inflammatory chemicals that interferes with your hormones that control hunger, blood sugar, stress, and that's why having a lot of visceral fat can pretty drastically lead to disease or other poor health outcomes the longer you have it on. So it's not right away. But usually this type of fat, by the time it looks more visible, like you can clearly see your belly is protruding or something, it's been there for a long time. But it's not the first type of fat you will accumulate. You will always accumulate the subcutaneous fat first, and then when fat just needs more places to go from poor diet, excess calories, that is how it will start accumulating on the body, and that's the one that everyone needs to be really aware of, obviously from an aesthetic reason, but this is also associated with, if we think about like a hard belly, not like soft and squishy, more hard, classic like beer belly vibe is kind of what visceral fat looks like, and the person in general doesn't need to always look overweight elsewhere. Some people have like a lot of visceral belly fat and then skinny legs, skinny arms, like we've all seen those people, and those are actually the people where I would be most concerned about the health, because it's like, why is your body accumulating all that fat in that one area? So that's definitely an indicator of, poor health right there. But belly fat is very dependent on the individual. So everyone has a different capacity to store belly fat. Obviously, there's a big genetic component, so I just want to get that out of the way. I'm not talking about genetics today, but some people just store a little bit more fat in their belly. And I will say, like, I am one of those people. That's always been where I store more belly fat. Always been that way. Probably how it will always be. But obviously I'm not overweight, so I'm not that concerned about it. But there are some people who just have a little belly pooch, especially women. They're dying to get rid of it. You might never fully get rid of it unless you have to like get to really low body fat. But I'm talking about people who maybe didn't have it before and they've noticed more fat accumulation in the belly area, either pretty quickly or more recently over time. So that's like what we are talking about today, not the genetic component, although that is very important. So why do some people store more belly fat? One reason is the stress and cortisol connection. So when you're stressed, your body releases cortisol, and if your cortisol is chronically elevated, that does tell your body to store more fat in the midsection. So, this is one of the biggest indicators of really high stress, is just having this happen slowly over time. This is why a lot of women experience this in like their 30s, 40s, usually after they have kids. Life stress happens, or men over time. That also can happen, but there's definitely a cortisol component there. Another big component is hormonal changes. So the cortisol is a hormone. that works in one pathway. And then when we look at women, we look at mostly estrogen. So when estrogen starts to drop naturally in perimenopause and menopause, this will change how your belly fat accumulates. So in your reproductive years, when you're getting a period, higher estrogen favors fat storage in like the glutes, hips, and thighs. That fat is more metabolically stable, and that serves as an energy reserve for fertility, pregnancy, and breastfeeding. There's a biological reason why women have more fat in like the glutes and thighs compared to men. That is why. So when estrogen starts to decline, fat storage will shift away from the hip and thigh area and relocate more centrally in the belly area around the organs, and that's because of the estrogen change. So this is why a lot of women, when they hit menopause, they're like, and then all of a sudden the fat just started like accumulating on my belly, or they'll always say like, I got a layer of fat that wasn't there before that just came on and is not going anywhere. Super common for that to happen towards like the end of the 40s, early 50s, going through menopause, and that's a hormonal thing that's, totally driving that. For men, we also have a hormonal driver. Declining testosterone has a similar effect, shifting towards belly fat accumulation. Going back to dad bod in the beginning, I think this is like one of the reasons if men kind of aren't lifting or taking care of themselves, when they hit their 30s and we start seeing that testosterone decline, that's where like dad bod can incline, which is just more belly fat accumulation, and then maybe having not enough muscle in the arms or legs. So it just creates an appearance that's more like, the abdominal area is just heavier than the rest of the body. But that's also has a lot to do with testosterone. So, that if anyone's curious about where you're at, getting your labs done and getting that looked at could be really helpful for you to just understand, like, is this hormonally driven or not so much?
We're only on part one of the reasons that contribute to this, and we're going to outline all of them and also how to repair it. But I just want to underscore already, we're not really talking about calories. Like, it is more complicated than that. And Kat, we have an episode on calories in, calories out. But if you are a busy mom, or you have a full-time job, or you're, a dad and you have a full-time job, or whatever it is, you might be having an elevated cortisol response day in and day out. And then also trying to cut calories, which might make the problem worse by skipping breakfast or fasting or whatever, and also trying to work out too much and all of that. And so this is just really important to understand everything Kat's saying, as much as it might seem science-y. I've lost count of how many people I'll talk to, and they're like, I'm trying to lose weight. I'm like, oh, what are you doing? They're like, I'm just trying to eat less. And it's like, well, maybe that will work for you sometimes, but there's so many other factors. And so it's really important to understand all of these different responses that are happening, especially for belly fat.
Yes, and there's a lot more reasons, I would say, than we're going to get into. We're just summarizing like the most common ones. So next up, we have lifestyle factors. So this is where it gets very broad. And this is also where your individual resilience or genetic potential to combat these things also take a big role. Like, there are people who, really don't sleep at all and they seem to be fine. There are people who like sleep a lot and are not fine. I know everyone's really different here, but generally speaking, lack of sleep, a sedentary lifestyle, eating ultra processed foods, all promote belly fat accumulation for a variety of reasons: how it impacts your hormones, how it impacts your stress, your immune system, like all of those things play a role. But there's an interesting stat of people who sleep less than 6 hours per night are 31% more likely to develop central obesity. So more belly fat accumulation just because you're not sleeping enough. And like we are like the number one proponents of sleep fixing a lot of things. And this just goes to show that like not getting enough sleep could contribute to belly fat accumulation, which no one wants. So if this is a reason to get enough sleep, I hope this one finally lands and resonates. But that's pretty powerful stuff. And you can't just start sleeping a lot more in your 50s and 60s to combat this. Like those are not the times to really make a change. It's now, or whatever age you're at, especially if you're young and you think like sleep is not a big deal. Really try to get as much as you possibly can, because it really impacts your body way deeper than you think.
And I am rarely on team set your alarm for 4 a.m. and work out 3 days. I think there are exceptions, but generally speaking, when I hear people doing that, I'm like, that sounds unsustainable. It sounds hard, and it sounds like you're not getting 7 hours of quality sleep. And this is another example of why, honestly, just focusing on recovery and sleep and balancing out your hormones might actually do better to hit your goals than forcing yourself to go to the gym at 5 in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. So alcohol, we have to talk about it. So going back to what I said about beer belly, like that's one thing everyone knows what a beer belly is. It's super important to understand, like, how does drinking beer, it's not really just beer, alcohol, lead to belly fat accumulation? Well, your body treats alcohol as a toxin, so it will always prioritize metabolizing that above everything else. So carbs, fats, protein, body doesn't care as much about food metabolism. So while your liver is really busy detoxing the alcohol out, these fats and carbs from food get shuttled into storage. So that is usually that's fat, it's being stored as fat, most likely in the belly area. And alcohol does raise your cortisol, so it's kind of like a double whammy. Alcohol will reduce your hormone output. It will worsen insulin resistance. So it's going to make the things that belly fat already make bad worse, and it will also contribute to the visceral fat accumulation. This doesn't mean you can't drink alcohol at all, but I think there's a lot of people that if we just dialed back on the alcohol, like don't have a glass of wine every single night for 50 years straight, and you will probably see belly fat reduction take place, especially if you're in a habit of having a lot of alcohol and then you reduce it. You'll probably see a pretty drastic change, and you might not need to change a single thing about your diet, but if you start accumulating this belly fat, like, you have to address those things, and alcohol is just one of the biggest factors for this. And then once you have all that toxic fat buildup, releasing those inflammatory molecules and whatnot, like, your body will just be less resilient to alcohol. You'll get sick more frequently. You'll just feel terrible. We don't want that cascade to happen, but I'm not usually one to say that a specific food or thing contributes to fat accumulation, but in this instance, when we're talking about visceral fat, alcohol is definitely a really important one to pay attention to. And if you're you go ahead.
I was going to say, I have the beer poster behind me. If you're watching the video, if you are trying to reduce it, which you probably are if you're listening to this episode, it's important not to, one, all or nothing. I mean, if you want to wake up and just totally go cold turkey, you can try it. It's just quite difficult. But focus on a slight reduction to start, and focus on what other areas of your life improve because of that. So let's just say you have 2 drinks every night, 2 glasses of wine, 2 beers, whatever, like almost every night. Cut that down to 1, or maybe do every other day some kind of slight reduction, and start to take note of how well you sleep, or how much more energy you have when you wake up in the morning, or the fact that maybe you can do something else at night, like go to the sauna, go for a walk, go see friends, like enable yourself to do something else other than solely focusing on that restriction. And this will snowball over time, because it's really hard to just wake up and be like, oh, I'm going to cut back on alcohol because Kat and Andrew said so. But you will see a lot of other changes well before the belly fat. And so if all you're doing is trying to restrict yourself and looking in the mirror every morning, that's going to be difficult. Find some other wins short term until you get to that larger result. Kat, you agree with that?
Yes, 100%. I cannot tell you how many people we also see in our program who really drastically reduce their belly fat, sometimes without much of a weight change. And that's a big indicator of a health improvement on my end, or we're just eating more balanced meals, insulin sensitivity is better. That will lead to more fat loss over time, but we've seen a lot of times where, like, that belly area really does change faster, I think, than other areas, if you have, like, actual belly fat accumulation. Now, if you have 5 to 10 pounds to lose, your belly fat might be the last to go because your body's not in a place where it needs to, like, really get rid of fat. That's a different situation. That could be more hormonal or cortisol related, or even genetic. But we see some really drastic changes in the belly area, you know, with weight not moving too much, and that's, like, a really good thing to see. And we've also seen it in, like, you know, a month, 2 months. It's not like this takes a really long time. Sometimes it's, like, really shocking how quickly it happens.
Absolutely. We're going to bust some myths.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff to say.
Oh, yeah. So before we get into strategies, I want to talk about some myths, because I think this is one area that, you know, is so off with the way people think. And these aren't things that we're necessarily going to talk about in the strategy. So I want to get some of these out of the way, because I know you're probably thinking about it or you've heard this before. So number 1 myth is spot reduction works. So you cannot, just like your belly or anywhere on your body, you cannot spot reduce fat. So you can't do a bunch of sit-ups, you can't wear a waist trainer and expect just to lose fat in that one area. Fat loss really is systemic, and your body decides where it wants to pull from first, and sometimes belly fat is last. Again, it depends on your starting situation, and how much weight you really have to lose, and the status of your health, metabolism, all of that. But for a lot of people, they're going to lose fat in the areas that they're leanest first, and then the stubborn areas come last. But this just means what's the whole thing? Like abs are made in the kitchen, not the gym.
Abs are made in the kitchen.
Yeah, but that's true because your diet has a lot to do with that. But no amount of sit-ups or core work can help spot reduce. But I'm a trainer. I'm a really big fan of core work. I think it's actually fundamental that people train their abs, but it's because if you have a strong core, your body will be less likely to be injured. You will have less back pain. You will be healthier. Your pelvic floor will be strong. Ab work is really important for day-to-day functioning, especially as you age, or if you do a sport, it's a non-negotiable. But anytime I do core work, I am not thinking at all about having abs because that's not what's going to happen. It's really about, making sure your alignment is good and that TVA, all of those muscles that are harder to touch, those are important. And yes, there could be some aesthetic component to that if you're lean, if you're already pretty lean, but if you're not, then probably not so much, but still do core work. But it's not going to spot reduce fat. Get rid of that myth in your brain. Nothing you ever do anywhere on your body will really spot reduce fat. It's been disproven a million times.
But you will still see influencers do it. The classic, lift up their shirt, point to their abs, and be like, here are the workouts that I do every day.
Yep.
Don't
it's
get
crazy.
me started.
Yeah, if you're 5% body fat and you do some crunches, you'll get a pump in those muscles and they'll be popping, but who has that? Not many people. Except that guy on the internet. All right, so myth number 2 is carbs cause belly fat. So I think more than fats or protein, people think carbs directly, especially carbs at night, directly lead to belly fat. It is not that simple. Fat gain is never that simple. There are a lot of carbs that are really important to eat, like oats, beans, fruits, veggies. They actually protect against fat gain because they have a lot of nutrients, they have fiber. The real culprits that just impact the body negatively and can lead to fat gain when eaten in excess are the refined carbs, refined sugars, eating carbs on their own, spiking blood sugar, and just eating excess calories overall. So you really can't be eating carbs to gain belly fat. If you are gaining belly fat and eating carbs, it's because of the carbs you're eating or the other things you're not eating. It's far more complex than that. But a lot of people have a fear of carbs, and honestly, carbs are really wonderful for building muscle, feeling good, having energy. They are necessary for everybody, for your brain to function. So if we just shift the fear of carbs, but to making sure it's the right types of carbs we are eating, that's where I want you to focus on. But no carb eaten at night is going to make you gain fat by the morning. That's just so not how the body works.
And in case anyone isn't clear, whole food carbs, like rice, like oats, very different from refined sugar, which if you're not familiar is processed, meant to be either really sweet or sit on a shelf. So think crackers, think cake, things like that. Big difference. You could go down the rabbit hole of they're all energy at the end of the day, and you will see runners eat candy and stuff to keep going, and that's not what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. But yes, if you don't know refined sugar, is just think of what comes from the ground versus what comes from the middle of the grocery store, perhaps.
Yes, exactly. All right, so last myth we have here is that cardio can melt belly fat, or I guess the idea that you have to do cardio to get rid of belly fat. This is not true. So resistance training plus HIIT training is actually the most effective for reducing belly fat. A study in 2017 showed that HIIT training reduced visceral fat by 28% more than steady state cardio. So that's a pretty strong stat. And now you're probably like, hey, you guys shit on HIIT all the time. And you're not wrong. But I think that's because here we are usually talking to a population of really busy people who are chronically stressed, who have no time, are running on fumes. they're not the people that HIIT is really good for. If your cortisol is off the charts, HIIT might not help. But if we're taking an untrained individual or a sedentary obese person and they start doing HIIT, you better believe their body's going to be like, whoa, like they're going to see some strong benefits. And I did not look at this study, but it was done on obese people. So that's kind of what that means there. So, but on the other hand of that, I still strongly would say steady state cardio plus resistance training will lead to belly fat reduction. So I don't think if you hear that and you're like, oh, I have to do HIIT now, I don't think so. But I think if you're pretty healthy, not super stressed, and you're short on time for a workout, I think that could be fine. But I don't think you necessarily need to do that. But the bottom non-negotiable is resistance training actually here. So it's not cardio. It's having resistance training, working your muscles, trying to build muscle when you can. That can be really beneficial for your insulin sensitivity and belly fat. But cardio does burn calories. So if you add more cardio in, you could, lose more fat, but if you do too much, it could backfire. So that's why cardio is not the best lever to pull. I'd much rather you do more with lifestyle and your diet first. And then add cardio if you have time and you can very consciously manage how much you're doing.
And I want to make sure this is clear is everybody's different. There's a reason this is a podcast episode because we have a lot to cover and everyone's in a different place. And so what we don't want you to do is out of context say, well, Kat says HIIT burns belly fat. You might be one of those people back to the beginning of the episode where your cortisol is really the problem. So what you want to do is look across all the things we've outlined and say, well, where am I doing well and where am I not? If you're already doing a few days a week of cardio or HIIT, maybe you don't need to do anymore. In fact, maybe you need to do less and that's okay. Maybe you should focus on something else like overconsumption of alcohol or cortisol response or whatever it might be. And so don't just pick one thing and only do that with tunnel vision. You really want to see where can you improve looking at the bigger picture. And everyone's got a different answer for that.
Yep. All right. So science-backed strategies to lose belly fat. Part you've all been waiting for. So nutrition is the number one lever. You cannot ignore this. Sorry, you're going to have to make some dietary changes. This is incredibly important. And I'm sure if you're struggling with belly fat or fat loss in general, there's probably some dietary tweaks you could make. So starting with protein. Protein's really important. We've talked about it a million times, but I'll never stop. Protein keeps you full. It supports your muscle mass. It reduces insulin sensitivity. If you are not aware of how much protein you're eating, try to get like 1 to 2 sizes of your palm. If you look at your hand, that's a good way to look at a serving size. But if you're aware of macros and you know how to read a nutrition label, let's aim for 25 grams minimum. More is better. I don't even have an upper limit. I'm not really that concerned about anyone eating too much protein in one sitting. But we do want to have at least 25, 30 grams minimum and hit your daily goal. Maybe that's 1 gram per pound of body weight. Maybe it's like 0.75. Somewhere in that range would be good. But if you don't know how much protein you're eating, that would be a really good exploration to do. Doesn't mean you need to track your food more than a couple days, but you should know where you're at because there's a really big difference if you're a 150-pound female and you're eating 60 grams per day or you're eating 130 grams per day. Humongous difference, and that will tell you a lot about what you need to know regarding like the top thing to do for your belly fat is just eat more protein, make sure you're eating enough, and don't really worry about too much. Maybe think about not eating too much of the other things, but if you're just focusing on protein, I think that's a really good place to start. And then we have fiber. So fiber regulates blood sugar. It's really good for your gut microbiome. It helps reduce cravings. Everything you want to be going well in a fat loss phase, fiber is very helpful. So for women, we want 25 gram minimum. For men, about 35 gram minimum. I don't really like dividing it up to women and men because that's only based on the fact that women are smaller. But if you're eating like 2,000 calories then I would say like 30 grams. And then we want more for the higher calorie your diet is. So for example, like there are some fit females who are eating like 2,500, 2,600 calories. I would not say 25 grams is good. I would want more. So it's kind of based on where you're at. But if you are in a deficit, like cutting calories, aim for that 25. Or if you have no idea where you're at with fiber, another good reason, just like protein, do some logging, see where you're at. I think fiber is one where a lot of people have no idea what they're eating and they don't even know what a good amount of fiber looks like. So that's just a really good thing to clue in on. But balancing out your gut, regulating cravings, insulin will do a lot for belly fat.
A lot of people also, I think, associate fiber with Metamucil. What are your thoughts on that, Kat, for someone who just really has none in their diet? Supplement instead? Is that the right approach for belly fat? Is it helpful? Should we not think about that? What do you think?
Good question. So the classic like Miralax, Metamucil, Citrusel, the over-the-counter fibers, they're not great. If you look at the ingredients on there, you're probably like, what is this? Good question. But I think getting dietary fiber, most important. Your body can do the most with fiber that comes from food. And if you need to supplement, you can supplement. I'm not going to tell you not to, but I think if you don't take the time to improve your dietary fibers and you just do a tablespoon of a supplement, a random over-the-counter supplement every day and think that's all you need, you're probably wrong, especially if you're already doing that and you have belly fat and it's accumulating and not going away. Definitely a good sign to focus on, adding real fibers back in. And I know a lot of people who have ever gone to the doctor with a gut issue is told to just get the over-the-counter fibers. That's what they're told to do. That's like, from kids to adults, that is the number one recommendation. It's because they don't know much about diet and they can't really talk to you about what foods have fiber because they're probably not even sure. So that's just a really easy, like, oh, go get this thing. And there are some really good fiber supplements out there, but I would say before doing that, let's focus on real food first because that's what your body and your microbiome can do the most with. All right, so now we need to think about liquid calories. So I would say cutting sugary drinks that spike your blood sugar, like soda or sweet teas, energy drinks, these are full of empty calories. So this is a really good place to start to just slash a couple hundred calories from your day. You could replace it with diet soda. I'm not mad at diet soda, but it's really just having an excess of tons of sugar in one sitting that will spike your blood sugar. That's going to cause an issue. Alcohol, like I mentioned, it's stored preferentially as belly fat. So if you just drink less alcohol, it could probably do wonders. But also think about how alcohol impacts your food choices. Does it make you eat poor quality food at 11 p.m. when you have 5 slices of pizza that you wouldn't have normally had? Like, alcohol makes people do other things.
The gateway drug.
Yes, that leads to unhealthy things. So it's not just the alcohol, it's like everything else and the poor sleep and whatnot. So maybe take a look at how much you're drinking, cut it in half, cut it by 25%, bring some more water in there, and I think that will make a really big change. But again, it really depends how much you are currently drinking. If you have 2 drinks a week, this would not be the main lever to pull. I would look at the other things. But if you're drinking 7+ drinks a week, that's probably a good thing to pay attention to. And then we need to be in a deficit to lose fat. I will say, like I mentioned earlier, I think people can really lose belly fat if they're not in a healthy place without much of a caloric deficit just by eating better quality food. But overall, the rules of fat loss tell us that you do have to be, burning more than you consume. And I would want everyone to do a pretty sustainable deficit that's about 300 to 500 calories compared to your maintenance. So we're not slashing 1,000 calories. We're not doing anything super crazy here, but you need to be in a deficit to lose fat. And you might need to work in a few phases before hitting your goal. If you have a lot of belly fat to lose, one caloric deficit cycle of like 8 to 12 weeks probably won't get you to where you want to be. That's a good sign to then take a rest, get back up to maintenance, and then do another fat loss phase. You can't just be in a chronic diet forever because that will also impact your metabolism, cortisol, all that stuff. So I just want to be super realistic. You may need to do a couple cycles of this depending on where you're at, and that's okay. You will actually see if you do phases of fat loss and maintenance and fat loss, you'll probably see that you still lose belly fat when you're in maintenance phase. If you're lifting weights, if you're building muscle, you're eating good quality food, you will still see that belly fat come off even when you get calories back up. That's the amazing part of diet and habit change. That's why everything we tell people to do is really effective when they're not in a fat loss phase anymore and they still actually end up losing fat. And that's where everyone wants to be. But sometimes you have to make a bunch of changes to get there. But I would tell all of you guys listening, try to be in some sort of caloric deficit just to make sure you're losing fat in general. And then last one we have here is to eat for your gut. So an inflamed gut really can drive insulin resistance and belly fat storage for a million reasons, from how it impacts your nutrient absorption to sluggish bowel movements, that, toxin load, detoxification. There's so many drivers here. And that's also why we mentioned fiber. Lots of fiber, eat fermented foods, and really try to reduce eating processed foods or junk that really acts as like a inflammatory thing in your body that activates your immune system and impairs your gut health. This is why eating ultra processed foods or just more poor quality foods than better really overloads your system, makes you really stressed, creates dysfunction. And then at the very end of all of that, that's when the belly fat starts to accumulate. So we've already done like a lot of damage before that starts happening. So if you're already there, we need to do a lot of steps to get the gut health back in order. And you do not need to have diarrhea or acid reflux to have poor gut issues. You may not really know, but I bet if you are struggling with belly fat, there's probably some sort of driver in the gut health department. So just doing a couple simple things can make a big difference there. All right, so next we have exercise. Exercise is also very important. I say nutrition first because if you do nutrition stuff, even if you're not exercising much, you can get somewhere. Do I think you can get somewhere if you only exercise without changing your nutrition? Yeah, maybe for a little bit of time, but you're probably not going to keep it off. Or you may only see like a couple weeks of a good result and then you kind of plateau out. And that's because like nutrition really is like the king here. But for exercise, we want to be strength training at least 2 to 3 times per week. So when you're dieting, it helps preserve your muscle mass. If you're not dieting, it helps build muscle mass, and it can also boost your metabolic rate. Your body can tolerate carbs better. You will have better insulin sensitivity. If you are working out, you will be more metabolically healthy. If you have muscle mass and you're lifting weights, like the health benefits are endless to having more muscle, especially as you age or get into like postmenopausal years or like 60s, 70s. Like you will be very happy if you built muscle prior to that, when you look amazing at that age and no one else does. HIIT, like we talked about, can be effective, and that a true HIIT workout is maybe 30 minutes. I would say most 20. It should not be like an hour-long HIIT class. So silly. That's not real, or that's way too much. No one needs to do that much. But short bursts. It's kind of like going all out for a short amount of time, and then you recover. So that's more efficient for time. And so if you don't want to do like a 45-minute steady state cardio, do some HIIT, but like we mentioned earlier, just make sure you're in a good place to do so. But this is where sprints or intervals, circuits, these can be really effective here. There are some people who are really into sprinting, like twice a week, you do one sprint as fast and as powerful as you possibly could for like 10 seconds. And that's all they do to like keep like VO2 max good and all these health markers down. Now, if you're not conditioned, I think the worst thing to go do is sprint as hard as you possibly can. You might blow your hamstring out, something terrible. But not a bad idea if you're like, oh, I already run. Let me just do some sprints and don't do long distance running. Like that might work really well for you. You can also do it low impact on like a machine, elliptical sprints. You can do them on there, cycling. Like that's not a bad thing to do. And it is very time effective. And then we have NEAT, like we talked about earlier. So this is non-exercise activity. This is walking, just general walking to go places, cleaning your house, fidgeting around, gardening, like a lot of people's hobbies. These can really burn hundreds of calories a day, and they do make a big difference in fat loss. But especially not just fat loss in the phase you're losing it, it's when you want to sustain it, if you keep NEAT up. This is why if you're drastically increasing your cardio for 8 weeks just to lose fat and you don't plan on keeping that same intensity of cardio, you're going to have a rude awakening because you're going to have to keep doing the cardio to keep the weight off. That's why it's not a really good lever to pull. But if you just walk a lot and you make part of your day-to-day lifestyle, you get, 10,000 steps or whatever amount of steps, you will have a better time losing belly fat and keeping it off. And then NEAT is also a really important thing, I think, for everyone to have some sort of physical hobby that's not necessarily a workout. Like you want to be doing things that keep you active, like golfing. Golfing is a really good, it's an active hobby. It is a sport, but when you go to play, Andrew, you're probably more like having fun.
Yep.
We're learning. You're not there to like get a workout in. It's just happening while you're there.
All right. And there's benefits to that too, the mental approach.
Yeah.
In terms of NEAT, by the way, just to put it into perspective, first of all, it's a dangerous mentality to try to burn off what you eat. It's a conversation for another day, but you don't want to be in that mindset of like, oh, I had pizza, now I need to go run or go to a HIIT class. It's not really how it works. But NEAT in general, as Kat mentioned, is more sustainable. Most people burn more calories through non-exercise, through NEAT, than they do exercise. And so to give you an example, there was a study where a 145-pound person burns about 100 calories while sitting at work. But if they stood up, just standing at their desk, it's actually closer to 200 calories, which doesn't seem like a big difference. But if you add that up, it's over 18,000 calories in a year, which is like 5 pounds of weight loss for doing nothing other than standing at your desk. So just to put it in perspective, like doing dishes, mowing the lawn, gardening, golfing, all of this stuff, it really can add up quickly. And it's so much easier to be productive around your house or park a little farther from the office or something like that than it is to do endless cardio, which, as Kat mentioned, is not only hard to do to start, but then it also creates this baseline that you can never go under. And so increase your NEAT will do wonders.
Yeah, and I also think be aware if the things you're doing are increasing your NEAT. Like for example, I went to an archery birthday party last week. So it was like 2 hours straight of just shooting archery. And in my head, I wasn't like, ooh, I'm burning calories. But I was like, wow, this is a really, like, I am using my muscles and I'm not really trying, but like it's happening. So it kind of like feels good after that. So you can also like bring some awareness to that, and it might make you feel better about doing like the annoying chore or walking to that annoying place, or having a shitty parking spot and having to walk more. If you're like, oh, but I'm like getting more NEAT in, like that can be a positive thing. So always think about that too. And I think a lot of our clients, like, when they go to Disney, it's always like, but I'll get all my steps in. It's going to be really annoying and stressful, and the food's going to suck, and like my kid's going to be cranky, but I'm going to get a lot of steps. So it's like, that's always like the highlight of Disney. And I just put it in perspective of like, when you think about the benefit of like the physical activity you're doing, even if it's not for exercise, it makes you, gratitude, and then brings mindfulness, and will make you more likely to do it.
Yep. All right. So we've done nutrition, we've done exercise. We got a couple important ones left, right?
Yes. Last we have is lifestyle, of course. Your lifestyle needs to be on point for nutrition and exercise to be effective. This is a need. It is not a bonus. So it's not like, oh, great, if I get enough sleep. Sleep is very, very important. Like I mentioned that stat earlier, can lead to poor sleep just in general, will lead to more cravings, which, could make you overeat, make you more hungry, can lead to, it just on its own could lead to belly fat accumulation, but on top of how poorly it makes you eat, makes you irritable, crave sugar, all of those things is definitely a driver for that. I think everyone should aim for at least 7 hours per night. I know for a lot of people, especially women, 7 is not really enough. I know plenty of people in our program who are like, I sleep 7 hours a night and I still feel super tired in the morning. I'm like, well, no one said 7 hours. Just like 10,000 steps means nothing. 7 hours is not, like, you might need more. So think about that too. And if you're getting a lot of sleep and you're not waking up rested at all, then we probably have a hormonal cortisol thing going on. But if you're sitting here and you're like, okay, I really could sleep more, get an extra hour, extra 30 minutes, that's what I want you to be doing. That can be very, very effective, and not just for fat loss, but for all the other reasons. Having sleep will just make your life exponentially better. And then we have stress management, which is like the most vague, annoying recommendation, I know. But cortisol really will build belly fat. There are a lot of hidden stressors you don't know about. So these are things to bring awareness to, like nutrient deficiencies, poor digestion, not having any work-life balance, maybe having financial stress, maybe being super lonely, having no connection, arguing with your spouse all the time, your friends are all doing things and you never hang out, not having self-care, having no time for self-care, the 30 minutes after your kids go to bed, and then you got to go to bed early, so now we have no time for yourself. You have no hobbies. Like, all of these things are stressors that you're probably not aware of, because we think of stress as like things with work or deadlines and like school stuff. Like, that's not adult stress. Stress is very different. So if we can think about those things there's probably areas where you could just do a little bit better. We don't need to go crazy. We don't need to like sign up for therapy right away. But I mean, just try to reduce stress where you can, if possible. And a little bit of like meditation, journaling, breath work, all these things are proven to help mitigate stress, even in very short bouts. So that's why they're always recommended. But I know for someone who's never been interested in meditating once in their life, you're probably not about to start. You're not about to sit down for 5 minutes, be quiet, and really have that help. If you're genuinely interested, do it. But I think there's a lot of other things you can do for stress that aren't like gratitude journaling, as much as I love it. Like, we don't need to think, like, I feel like all stress management is this like woo-woo concept. Like, it's not. It's literally like eating more vegetables, getting a little bit more sleep, like calling your friend. Like, all of these things are really important. So those lifestyle factors matter. They all are important to get a better result, and that's why we don't want you to just do one thing. But if you could pick one from each of those categories, that could be a good place to start. So if you're like, I just want to focus on protein, strength training, and sleep, you're probably going to feel some really amazing benefits. We don't need to do all of the things, but when you look at that list, if you want to do something that's not on that list, I'm not going to tell you not to do it, but it might not be the most effective. No supplement, no little thing that you do will make a big difference if you're not doing some of these big guys first.
That's right. Yeah, no one is telling you to overhaul your life. In fact, we're kind of saying the opposite. These little small habits can really add up. So just to recap, we're really talking about visceral belly fat here, the one that surrounds your organs. It's the most dangerous kind of fat, and it's also the one that a lot of people want to get rid of aesthetically. And so it can be a stress response for both men and women. It can be an alcohol response. It can be lack of sleep. But you don't need to spot train. You don't need to do endless cardio. You want to increase your protein, increase your fiber foods, cut liquid calories, alcohol, especially if you can. A sustainable calorie deficit, a moderate calorie deficit. We're talking a few hundred calories, nothing extreme. Might not be a bad place as well, depending on what you eat now. Gut health, often overlooked. It's a big access point for nutrient absorption and helping with all of that. On the exercise front, resistance training you should be doing anyway, but a really, really important piece of this. There's also HIIT, there's also NEAT, and then in lifestyle, managing your stress, getting quality sleep. I know this sounds like a lot. One less drink a week, a little bit more fiber on your plate, going to bed 10 minutes earlier, and maybe picking up a hobby once a week that increases your NEAT. That's a massive lifestyle overhaul right there that mostly is just pretty easy to do and might even improve your quality of life, right? Kat, you do jiu-jitsu all the time. That is a mix of mental health plus hobby plus NEAT plus fitness, and that's the same for me for golf. It's like it's really been something I've invested my time and energy into. It's different than just feeling like I have to get up at 4 a.m. and run to be healthy. And so there's lots of ways to make all of these work together in your favor, and that will really overhaul your life. Kat, what else did we forget to mention today? Anything?
I think we covered most of it, but main takeaway here is if you improve your health, you'll probably lose belly fat. If you lose belly fat, you'll probably improve your health. So whichever way you want to look at it, you will probably do both. So that's just, either way, focusing on belly fat I think is a really good goal if you have a lot to lose. But be honest with yourself. If you don't have much to lose, then maybe, or you don't have visceral fat, we're not as concerned about having a little bit of the pinchable fat. But always a good thing to keep your eye on and work on these habits anyway, regardless, because they will make you healthier.
That's right. If you want help with this, you can DM Kat on Instagram, the word burn, and you will get our fat loss fuel guide, which has protein, fiber, other tips around this topic. You can find Kat on Instagram at CatBestWellness, and you can find me on Instagram at AndrewHayesLife. You can DM Kat the word burn for that guide. Listen and follow along for the next one. Don't do sit-ups, everybody. Do everything else.
Bye, guys.